Good evening to everyone. Welcome to another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, Phil Bossman. How you doing, Phil?
Doing good, man. I'm super excited today.
Yeah, so tonight we are going to be talking about GitHub Actions, and we are very excited to have our guest speaker tonight, Miss Chrissy LeMaire. Hi, Chrissy. How are you?
I'm so good, thank you.
We are so excited to have you with us tonight. Chrissy is a well-known person in the community. She's the creator of dbatools. She's a dual MVP, which there are not many of, and just an all-around good person. So we're super happy to have you with us tonight. Thanks for spending some time with us. Um, Tell us a little about what you do. What's your day job like?
My day job, I actually used to be a SQL Server DBA since the 90s, and I got tired of being on call and worrying about servers on a Friday, and I decided to switch to security because I'd been using PowerShell to automate SQL Server, and while I was there, I was like, oh, you need this, with Tenable.sc, which is a vulnerability scanner. And I started working with that and helping out the IA team. And I always look for opportunities to add things to my resume so that the next time that I interview, I could be like, oh yeah, when I was at NATO Special Ops, I was working with the security team, doing vulnerability analysis. And so I use that as a jumping off point to pivot, change my career, and now I do information security and but it's mostly PowerShell, which is really incredible, and that's what I actually love about PowerShell is that it's so versatile. So not only as a DBA can I use it, but I can use it with APIs as well. And then, if I want to make a move to the cloud, then that's going to be natural as well.
That's pretty amazing. I did not realize that you were doing a security focus now. I always thought of you as the DBA person, right? So that's amazing. So are you doing like all aspects of security, or are you concentrated in a particular area, or?
My group currently is based around risk management, but my focus as the security engineer, as opposed to like a risk manager, is I do secure things. So I still patch servers, I still patch SQL servers, and like my history, I also work with Linux, I also work with IIS, I work with VMware, Active Directory, Exchange, Skype, and so on. And so now I can use all of those skill sets to STIG, which is the Security Technical Implementation Guide from DISA. So it's basically hardening the entire network, and so I'm able to use all of those skills and PowerShell as often as possible to do all of that.
That's pretty awesome, man. That's great. So I have some experience with interfacing with security people for Active Directory because that's my main focus. But usually the people that are coming to me and asking questions about STIGs and implement this setting, they don't necessarily understand what they're asking or the impacts of what they're asking to do. So I always have to come back to them and say, like, I don't know that you really want us to turn that on. That's going to have a problem. So what's that like for you, being someone who has a strong sort of sense of like what it's like to actually config systems and have know of impacts?
Well, it's awesome that you bring that up because if anybody here is a systems engineer, there's actually a huge need in the information security realm for people like us who are systems engineers. And I will say the biggest thing is that I'm still stuck in the in the systems engineering mindset that whenever somebody like comes to me with a question, I want to pop in and help them fix it. But I have to know my role, which is that they are the administrators and I am IA, and I advise them. So they're looking to you for advising, and in this way, whenever they're doing because I don't do every single STIG, of course, across the whole network, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, can you tell me a little bit about TLS? And what it usually impacts, and then I can give them my experience from there. A lot of the times I'm mostly in IIS, and that's always fun because I do have a history as a web developer as well.
Wow, finding out lots of stuff about your background I didn't know about you. So a little bit of a code junkie, obviously, and GitHub Actions. How did you get started with GitHub Actions?
Oh, that's actually part of my presentation. Can I keep it till then?
Oh, okay, sure. So,
Got it.
so maybe that's a good lead in here, Phil. Anything you want to add before we hand it over to Chrissy?
No, I was just going to get into that. Is like, with, the twist into GitHub Actions, is it more of like, hey, doing some automation for me, or is it more of like managing my code, or is that kind of where, is that what got you into using GitHub and GitHub Actions and those kind of things?
I always like things that are like native, centralized, built in. It's one of the reasons that I love PowerShell. And with GitHub Actions, since in my entire workflow is there, we were using AppVeyor, but that's like a whole different platform. So the reason that I was excited about it is primarily for code and development and performing pester tests and things like that.
Okay, cool.
And Adil brought up something. I am also, whenever I do web development, it's for realcajunrecipes.com. That's my other activity that I do, and it started in 2002. And it's been a lot of fun over the course of time. People are like, "Can you please release a cookbook?" Because the things that we cook at home in Louisiana are different from what people usually expect. It's not all crazy spicy and nasty and blackened. And so we put the stuff that we grew up eating, we got a cookbook together, and you can actually find it on Amazon. And just yesterday I looked after like a year of not looking, and we have 60 reviews and like 4.7 stars. So I
That's
am so excited. I was like, I'd always hoped for that with like dbatools and a month of lunches. But now this cookbook that was like almost a side thought has become that for me. So that's super cool.
So lots of different projects to work on. Very busy. And on top of that, she's also a Twitch streamer from time to time. I have actually been in some of her streams and sort of watch how she sort of works through problems, which is really interesting, and sort of you kind of have motivated me to go out and buy a camera and start
Awesome.
kicking around and doing that. I'm not sure how well that's going to go, but we'll see. I'm thinking about giving it a shot. But
Looking forward to it.
yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. Let's do a few, and then let's see if you still say the same thing.
Got it.
All right. Well, you know what? We're super excited to have you tonight, and we want to let you do what you do. So maybe we'll hand it over to you, and you can take
Got
it
it.
away.
All right. Let me expand my screen. I'm on a Mac and an RDP to my little machine. So let's see. I'm going to open that share tray.
We won't hold that against you though.
Oh, all right. Everything disappears when I do this. All right.
There we go. Looks good.
Excellent. Okay. So, I think I'm going to click here and then it'll do something. So thank you so much for joining me in this presentation tonight. I'll be talking about GitHub Actions and PowerShell. So my name is Chrissy LeMaire, and as Mike mentioned, I am a Microsoft MVP awarded for my work in both SQL Server and PowerShell, and I am also a GitHub star, which is essentially an MVP of GitHub. For my day job, I am a security engineer, blue teamer, vulnerability analyst at General Dynamics. And if you have any questions about this presentation that we don't address during the actual session, you can hit me up on Twitter. I am at CL. So whenever I was looking to distill what GitHub Actions is, I watched so many YouTube videos, and it was really tough, like just getting it into words. So what I'm going to do is convey it using GitHub's definition, and then tell you how it is that I actually use GitHub Actions and how I got into it. So GitHub Actions, it's an API for cause and effect on GitHub. It helps you orchestrate any workflow based on any GitHub event, and then GitHub manages the execution. It provides some really nice feedback, and then it secures every step along the way, protecting things like your passwords and tokens and API keys. And with GitHub Actions, workflows, it's just steps. In code, it's just YAML, and a repository so you can create, share, reuse, and fork your software development process. Now, I started using GitHub Actions pretty much whenever it was in beta, because before I was using a platform called AppVeyor. We actually still do use it, but I like things all in one place, and I wanted to really understand GitHub Actions and what it offered. And the first thing that I did with my cross-platform module called dbatools, I spun up 3 runners, which are like little VMs, and it was Mac, Linux, and Windows. And I made sure that any changes that were made to the code, it would still import on there and execute a couple commands. And then I saw something called the GitHub Actions Marketplace, where you could actually create actions and then share them with the world. And I wanted to be a part of that. But whenever I went at the time, PowerShell wasn't supported. And it was like TypeScript or something. And I was like, oh man, that's a bummer. TypeScript has been on my to-do list to learn for a super long time, but I don't think I'm going to get around to it anytime soon. But in August of 2020, GitHub released something called Composite Actions, which do allow you to run PowerShell scripts. So my buddy Sander Stad, he lives in the Netherlands. He reached out and he was like, Chrissy, I'm so excited for my SQL Server PowerShell project. I am spinning up a container with SQL Server, and then I'm executing PowerShell and T-SQL-T unit testing against all of my code, and it's really awesome. And I was like, man, I want to get into that. That sounds like really straightforward. So I took a look at his YAML, and at the time I was working on dbatools, which is, it's a PowerShell module that wraps the Nessus API. It's based off of Posh Nessus by Carlos, darn, I forget his last name. And so at the time, whenever I was working on this, I was like, I would love to execute this code against an actual Nessus server. So it's a web server. But I was like, it has to be licensed. You can download a free license for Nessus Essentials, but I just didn't think that it would be out there, the Docker container. So I went and I looked on Docker Hub and I found it. This is awesome. So that was like my first action. I was able to spin it up and then execute my dbatools commands against a live web server. And that was really exciting. And then along the way, I had an idea for something that I can add to the GitHub Marketplace and do it in PowerShell. And that's what I'm going to dive into tonight to show you. And hopefully we'll get a whole bunch more PowerShell scripts up there. So this is essentially what it looks like. And shout out to all of the YAML haters, because I expected this to be torture. I hadn't really worked that much with YAML before. I'd kind of hacked what people did in dbatools, but I didn't really get super involved. But I loaded up this YAML file into VS Code, and it does most of the formatting for you, or it at least tells you when you do something wrong. So this is actually a complete workflow, and I'll go through it line by line. So for names, you could just name it anything. And the on basically says anytime that somebody pushes a commit or performs a pull request, run this job. And I set my default shell to push, which is super awesome. So on all of their runners, they have on all of their runners, they have PowerShell version 7. It's funny in my head, Linux and PowerShell version 7 are the same thing, because that's pretty much the only time that I use PS7 and this. And so then you go through your jobs. I named this one Run Tests, and then I told it to run on, just for this, Ubuntu latest. So it spins up this runner, and then it checks out the repository. And for this, like, I know that maybe it looks unusual because it's not PowerShell, but what I do is I just go to somebody's repo, copy, paste, and then work from there. So for any of you that are familiar with Docker, the next line should be pretty straightforward, which is Docker run. And this will spin up this Docker container that I found on Docker Hub, and then it exposes the port, the default port for Nessus. Next, remember whenever I talked about that license that you can get for free? It is mine, and I don't want everybody to know about it. So I went and I added a secret to my repository, and I will show you how to do that real quick. Let's pop on in. So this is dbatools. It has a little video and everything. It's super fun. I love it. It's pretty.
Hey, Chrissy, can you just like zoom into that Chrome window?
You got it. How about this? Boom. Is this nice?
Better.
All right. Let me take a sip real quick. Okay, so if you go to settings in your repository, on the left here, you'll see secrets. And then there's like environmental secrets. You could set it at like the repo level. You could set it at the org level. For this, it's just at the repo level. And you could see all the ones that I've already set up. And once you create it, you can't see it anymore. You can create a new one and just be like, sup, and then, put in your value, go ahead and save it. Is this big enough as well? How about a little bigger?
That looks good.
Yeah, I think it's
Excellent.
good.
All righty. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. Okay, from current slide. So we go here, and so now I'm going to take it from that secrets that I created in my repository, and I'm going to set an environmental variable. And with the run, this is PowerShell. I take that variable and then I pipe it to set content, and I store it in on the Linux container at /temp/nessus.license. It's actually, sorry, not on the container, it's on the VM runner itself. Next, I go to town with some PowerShell, and this should look pretty familiar. So we have the run. I wanted to highlight this right here, if you can see my mouse. So if you have just one line of code, you can put it all on the same line. But if you have multiples that you want to run, then you just throw a pipe there. And this is true for just pretty much every part of this YAML file. So here I am importing my module. TinTools is stored in the root of my checkout directory. And so it just imports it, supports splats, as you can see, and then I run my pester tests from there. And this is essentially what it looks like. So you have this actions button at the top of your repository, and you click it, and now we're going to go through and see what it is that I did later on. So what you saw there was pretty much like my first workflow that I created, and this is later on. And what I did was I went and with Docker Hub, I had heard that they were introducing some restrictions, and I wanted to explore the GitHub container repository. Also, because I wanted it to be faster. I wondered if it's stored, on-prem with or not on-prem, but if it's stored in GitHub's little data center, is it going to be faster? And Docker Hub takes like 11 seconds, and then the GitHub container repository takes 10 seconds. But what's cool is that I wanted to set it up with a bunch of stuff that was kind of private. And so this allows me free access to a private container. And then after it starts up, I wanted to mimic an enterprise environment. I didn't want to say like accept self-signed certs or anything. So I took from the secrets, I put a certificate authority root cert, and then I put my other certs, and I was able to write that to disk and just kind of make my little container more enterprise ready. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. So here I add a commit, I push it out to GitHub, and I replace the little dinosaur with the little lock, and it's starting this workflow run. At this point, I had named my job Nessus 8 to signify I was running it against a Nessus 8 server. So it's going to check out my repo. It's going to log into the GitHub container repository. It's going to pull down that container, and it's going to start up and expose the necessary ports. Next, it's going to write the license to disk. It's writing that CA. It's going and it's getting all of the required modules, things like PS Framework, the ones that I depend on. And then it'll initialize the Nessus server with the admin user and license. And it's doing this with PowerShell commands. There's the output. Then here it is running the pester test. And you'll notice at the bottom, it says that it's going to show some warnings. I do find that there are some limitations with Docker containers. So it'll say API isn't available, and no matter how long I waited, it just didn't work. But let's see if this specific change impacts the entire code repo. And we have green there. That means everything worked. This is really good. And this helps me sleep at night, especially like with dbatools. We have nearly 600 commands. And each time that we push a change to the repo, it'll go through and it'll run like thousands of tests. So I know that whenever we introduce a change, dbatools is still working as expected. And with 10 tools, I was writing the tests along the way because like that's just the way that I do it now because I do want to ensure that any changes that I make don't break old commands that I forgot about, things like that. So we just saw the use case for testing your new commands or your new commits, but GitHub Actions can also be used to automate tedious tasks like documentation and release note updates. Also, if you have a cross-platform PowerShell module, like I talked about before, you can also build your projects against Linux, Windows, and Mac OS to make sure that it remains cross-platform. If you build .NET projects, you can even build against the newest version of .NET. So you know that if Microsoft is releasing a new version, you could run a nightly build and make sure that none of their changes are creating breaking changes within your repository. Next, I like this. You can check your code for passwords and vulnerabilities. So if you have a dependent module that is vulnerable, then it can check for that. And then also, I've seen it to where people have created pull requests that actually update it to a non-vulnerable version. You can also, if you're in an industry that's tightly monitored or regulated, you can check to ensure that your project stays compliant with required regulations. And I really like this one. So updating your database with data from sources such as screen scrapes or remote repositories. I have another PowerShell module called KB Update that actually scrapes the Windows catalog, and it does it once a month. And I spun up a VM, I set up the scheduled task, and it was running. And then one day I got like I'd eaten too much into my allotted amount, and I was like, oh, I need to delete some things, and so I deleted that VM dumbly. I didn't have a backup, but if this was in GitHub Actions, then I would have all the code there, and they take care of everything, and it doesn't cost me anything at all. So you can do both a mix of workflows to test your code and also scheduled tasks. You can also do fun things, like it's not just enterprise stuff. You can also schedule and publish your blog posts and tweets. And I really like this one. So Stefan Stranger, he's a Microsoft employee in the Netherlands. He uses GitHub Actions in a really creative way to enable his network admins to keep up-to-date records of IP assignments and the available addresses used to configure his Azure virtual networks. I thought that was really cool. So before I talked about how you can run your workflow against any GitHub event, this is pretty much an exhaustive list, but I won't lie, I've only used push and pull requests. And in the future, I imagine that I will use schedule as well. But this has really, really good documentation. So anytime that you need to use any of these, GitHub so far has answered all of my questions with their docs. So when it comes to support and runners, we had talked about earlier how they spin up like this little VM, and the current support is Linux, Mac OS, Windows. We saw the containers, but if you have a project that you want to run against a little Raspberry Pi, that is also possible if you do something called self-hosting. I haven't done it yet, but it seems pretty straightforward. In addition to supporting PowerShell, it also supports a whole bunch of other stuff. So no matter what you're into, Node.js, Python, Java, Ruby, all of this is supported. And yesterday I was wondering, does this support COBOL and Fortran? And I was impressed to see that it does support in a container COBOL, but I haven't found anything for Fortran. So I thought that was really interesting. So I know what you're thinking. That is so powerful, it must cost something. And the answer for public repositories, if you're a corporation, if you're a private user, if you're using a public repository, there are no usage limitations. It is totally free, which is impressive. But if you have your code in a private repository, then there do come fees. And it really depends on which product you are. I guess most of us are probably free or pro. And with that comes, 500 megs or a gig. And then we have something that I call Linux minutes. It's the baseline minute. So if you have 2,000 free Linux minutes per month, that is actually just 1,000 Windows minutes are 200 macOS minutes. If you go past that and you use more than that free allotted amount, then you do pay a per minute rate. And with Linux, you could see it's super affordable. Mac OS is a whopping 8 cents per minute, and then Windows is 0.016. Now, in addition to that workflow that we saw, I'd mentioned the marketplace. And the first thing that I always do is what's there for PowerShell. And this is the part that I wanted to be a part of. And before, these have existed before the composite actions were introduced. And it's because they used little containers, but now it's native. And hopefully, after this, we'll see more additions to the marketplace with PowerShell. But I remember, like, even though I wanted to get in on the action, I didn't really know what to do, like what it was that I would put out here until I started working through my workflows and seeing, ooh, I would really like to cache my, instead of going out to install module and going out to the PowerShell gallery, maybe it's down, but it always added at least 10 seconds, and I wanted to reduce that. And I ended up creating an action that we will be jumping into shortly. So I'm doing the same thing with GitHub's official definition. So they say with composite actions, you can now create reusable actions using shell scripts and even mix multiple shell languages in the same action and reuse them for different workflows. So you can use Bash and you could use PowerShell all in the same action, and then you can share them amongst your own repos, or you can share it out to the marketplace and share it with the world. So whenever you're building a composite action, you have to keep 3 things in mind. So the 3 required things, it's input. And anytime that I approach something, I always kind of think of it in PowerShell terms. And inputs are like PowerShell parameters. And then runs is the process block, and then output is an output. So we'll be seeing more of this shortly. And this is what it looks like when you publish out, build your own action. It's a really cool little web page that we'll go to shortly. Let's get into some code, actually. Let's go here. All right, so here is, whenever I was creating this presentation, I was like, man, how am I going to convey this? And I was like, well, let's show this is the problem that I had and then how I solved it. So we're looking again at the YAML. It's again on push and pull request, a default to PowerShell, set up an Ubuntu runner, and then I check out my repository. I go and I start up my Docker container. This was the first one that I built. So at the time, I wasn't on GitHub's container repository. And I wanted to leave this in here because I do find that if you're running a container, sometimes you do have to wait for it to completely spin up and get that web server going. So you might find yourself needing to add in like a start sleep for a certain amount of time. Next, we see again, we're getting that environmental variable from our secrets, and then we write the license file. And this is where I was like, okay, how do I cache my PowerShell modules? I don't want to go out and get PS Framework and Posh RS Job over and over and over again. I don't want to bloat those numbers for the authors, and I don't want to wait all that time. So I just, I Googled, and then I ended up finding that GitHub is an official action called cache. And this is their action. So I was like, oh, this is pretty straightforward. Gonna copy paste that. And whenever I looked at it, I was like, okay, so we have some paths. That makes sense. Okay, so I guess this is a not. And then I still don't even know what this is. I wanted to more. If you scroll down, you'll find with the usage, it's really, really nice. They give you an example workflow that you could just copy paste. And that's what I did. I started with literally this workflow, and then I worked through it, and I made a lot of mistakes that I'm gonna go through here. And the whole time I was like, I don't want other people to have to go through this. And that's why I created the action. So first, we're going to give the this step an ID. And next, we are going to do this uses/cache at v2. Next up, so here's the paths, right? I had to figure out what these paths were. And that meant that I had to literally like push out. It was one of my 500. So imagine if PS Framework gets like 500 hits just because I am like really commit heavy. I'll always be sending out to GitHub. And so one of those commits, I had to show my PS module path. I think that's what it is. And I finally figured out that on like the Linux and the Mac machines, that this is where it stores all of the modules whenever it installs it. Then, and here's the pipe again that we had talked about earlier that allows you to add in multiple lines. And I set this key, and I always like to be like as simplified as possible. So I was like, all right, I got myself a key. It's a runner OS dash, and then I'll just be like PS modules. I don't want to say like specifically whatever. So I kept that generic. Kind of like with this as well, the ID is super generic. Next, with this was something that I copied from their website, and it basically says if there is no cache hit, then do these steps. And initially, also made another mistake. I just went straight for it. I installed the module, and then it failed because the repository needed to be trusted. So that is an essential step. So I'm going through here, and I do want to explain the cache hit real quick. So the cache hit is based on the key, and essentially, if you have, you name it this, and it's like if I've already ran with that key before, then I don't have to run this again.
So can I ask a question about this whole caching thing and your experience there? Is like, so it's caching it into your own repository? Is it inside the runner? And doesn't the runner like go away, or how does that work? Or
I actually don't know the internals. I had that question myself. It is, to my knowledge, not on my own repository, but I only say that because I haven't seen it. And there might be a whole lot of hidden files, because like even if you paste an image into your repository, then that is stored within the files as well. So I actually don't know where this is stored. I looked into it, and then I couldn't figure it out fast enough, so I abandoned it. So that's actually a really good question that I'm going to add to my list in case anybody else has that question, because by the way, I am presenting at the PowerShell Summit, and it is actually this presentation, and I'm doing it here because everybody needs a practice run, and I also want to gather questions that I could potentially answer within my recorded session.
so it looks like, Justin says that it's something inside your GitHub Actions storage, but you can't access it. The question is how often does it recache? Like if you updated that, well, is it going to hold on to PS Framework? And if they make a change, well, how do you know that they made a change? It's like your local version of it.
In my experience, I wasn't able to invalidate it until I changed my key. But it's possible. I just wasn't able to do it whenever I was testing this. And
Cool.
also, so we have that key, and I was like, this was also a mistake because you don't need to go. I was like, man, every time I'm gonna have to add this, I'm gonna have to do this, and then like paste it, and then oops, do this, and then dbatools, and then add it here, and then dbatools, and then I didn't know how it worked because I was just copy pasting and like trying stuff. And I was like, why isn't it go and get the newest one? And then that's when I realized, oh, I have to like add a key. So I have to be like PS modules 1. And then it was like 1, 2, 2, 2, test. And that got super annoying. But after I was able to get it to work, I realized in the end, you actually don't need this. So it's just that modules directory, and whatever it is that you install in there, you don't have to worry about it. It's just that directory. It's not any subdirectories under it. So then once it goes and it gets all of the required modules, then it will import, and we had seen this before. It's importing the module and then just like connecting. This is just an example. So then was like, I want to create this action for everyone. And let's go ahead and look at the GitHub action that I created. I was really impressed, or like that it's just 2 files, right? So you could fork my repository and then like add whatever you wanted, and then publish your own. So it's the license, the README. Anytime like I noticed a typo and I was like, ah, it's already on the marketplace. Am I gonna have to like recreate a release and then like put it out there just because I changed my README? And the answer is no. As soon as you update your own README, it's gonna be reflected in the marketplace. Next, you have this action.yaml. And the moment that you put in an action.yaml file into your root directory, you are presented with this like publish to marketplace, and then you can publish it there, and then you can view it on the marketplace, which is really satisfying. So whenever you look at this, here's the documentation. I hate that it's so long. It drives me crazy. What's ideal is that I could just give this to people and they could run this short block. Unfortunately, at this time, GitHub doesn't support um, like more than one action in your action. So that means that I can't use the cache v2. And then I was like, oh, should I just build a cacher? And I was like, no, because I looked at theirs and it was intense. So at this time, you do have to copy this entire thing. And what we'll see, I'm gonna just replace this, right? Oh, look at that. I have to do some tabs until it does. See, no more squiggles. Come on, no more. I did this yesterday. Like how I'm like, shout out to the YAML haters. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. So this is ultimately what you can now use, and we will go through that now, probably. Let's, yeah. All right. So before we actually finish this off, let me show you around the both the action and the PowerShell script that is used. So here we have, you start open with a parameter, right? And we have this module string, this module parameter, so you could pass in comma separated values, and then also a type. So once you pass that in, it creates this array and for the needed list. And I really don't like get module list available because it takes like at least 3 seconds to run. But I couldn't figure out a way around it. Even with whenever you get the installed modules, it still has to load up PowerShell get, and it takes about the same amount of time. So we just started with that. So what I want to do is say, with all of the modules that are currently available, and there are some built in, things like Pester is actually built in. If that module doesn't exist, if each of the modules don't exist, then add them to the needed list, and then we're going to output that information. So whenever it goes to type, here we have, if I specify that the type is needed, there's a lot of write outputs that we'll be working with. You'll see, like whenever you use GitHub's examples, it's all echo. So I just changed that to write output. So this will return this needed list that's just comma separated and it's a string. If you pass the keygen requirement, remember whenever we were looking at that keygen before and I talked about how I had to add in like 1111-test? In this case, you don't have to worry about that because each time that you add a needed module, it will change your key and it will invalidate your results. I really don't know why I did this. I think, I don't know. I'd like to know. And then if you ask for the module path, this is why I actually had to go in and I spun up a Windows runner, and then I found where it saves it there. So the running is runner admin, and it's storing it in the same local repository. And then here is for Windows, it's this, and then for everything else, for Mac, for your ARM, for everything like that, it is going to be this location. And then Now let's look at the actual YAML. And what I did was I just went out to the internet and I copied a composite cache and I kind of worked with that. So first we have the name, which is PowerShell module cache, and we'll compare this up against the documentation here. So we have PowerShell module cache, and then you see this nice little uniform icon. You have a list to choose from. I picked gray, dark, and download. And then the description is cache modules from the PowerShell gallery. And it might match up. I did update it a little bit to cache modules. Actually, I don't know where this goes. I thought that it would appear here, but I guess not. So then we have the description and then the inputs, right? We had talked about before how inputs are sort of like PowerShell parameters. And in this case, my parameter is modules to cache. That's where I specify PS framework, Posh RS job, and DBA tools when I update my code block here. I'm so sorry. When I practiced this last night, I'm like, do I do the demo YAML first and paste it there? So we'll go through here and then we'll go back to the action. My apologies. So here's our, the name and then the ID. I just kept it PS module cache. And then the uses is potato quality. This is your username / then your repository name, and then this @v1. When we go and we look at my repository, we go here. I have a release that says v1, but it doesn't have to be a release. Whenever you're developing your PS mod, or sorry, whenever you're developing your action, if you create a branch and name it test, it's super cool. You can just do this and say @test. Next, we have that modules to cache, and this is the only thing that you have to change when you copy and paste from the Actions marketplace. In this case, I want PS framework. You know what I want? I want Posh RS job, and then I want DBA tools. So it's going to pass this in. And then if you remember that cacher before, we were like, oh, what's the path? I don't know. So in this case, you get it from the output, which is steps.ps module. It doesn't really matter because you've copied and pasted this from the marketplace. But if you're interested, it'll return the module path and then the key gen. And all of this, you don't even have to worry about this either because it will return the needed modules. So let's go back here. This is, again, the action.yaml. Here's our inputs, AKA parameters. And then the runs. This is our little process block, right? So you have to say using composite in order to use PowerShell. And then I threw in some bash for flavor, did a little echo, so gathering information for modules. And because I passed in PS framework, Posh RS job, and DBA tools, that is what's going to be shown on screen. And then the ID is apparently loop-de-loop, and it could be whatever it is that is here whenever you're developing your own action. It has to match down here. And you can come to my repo and again, like fork it and then do your own. So we'll go through, and what's it doing during this run process? Unfortunately, this is really not pretty, but you just copy paste and then change what it is that you need. So here's the GitHub action path, which is going to be your repository for your action. And then if we look at the repository, again, here's the main.ps1, right? So it's going to execute that. And if you remember when we looked at the parameters, we had module and type, and then it gave the output that was required. So we have main.ps1 and then type needed, and then the module is just the inputs. So the module is going to be PS framework, Posh RS job, DBA tools. And so it'll get what's needed, and it assigns it right here, and then we use it down at the bottom. We specify keygen, it'll automatically generate that keygen. It'll say something like Win32NT PS module Posh RS job DBA tools. And then the module path, again, if it's on Windows, it'll be one path. If it's on Linux or Mac OS, it'll be another path, and that's something that you won't have to figure out anymore if you use my action. And here are the outputs. So here's needed modules, and we see steps, and here's the loop-de-loop, right? So it goes and it looks at that, and then it looks at outputs, which is created here, and then we say needed. So that means it's going to execute main.ps1 dash type needed, and then module with all of the 3 modules, and it will output all of these things. For the key generator, for the unique key generator, it'll give the module path and the original request. So let's go ahead back to the demo.yaml and make sure that we have everything here. Here's our modules to cache. Here's our path, our key gen. These are all of the outputs. This is automatically built in. And then again, it'll install only what's needed. So if you did pass in Pester, it'll say Pester's already installed. So I'll just skip that, and I'll only give you like PS Framework and DBA tools. And when I was creating this this presentation, I was like, man, if I'm talking to PowerShell people, then maybe I can speak in a PowerShell language to reinforce the inputs, the runs, and the outputs. So I wrote a little concept script. And this is what it looks like, right? So I named it anything, doesn't really matter. And then I took the description, cache modules from the PowerShell gallery, and I want to again convey, this isn't part of the action itself. It's nowhere in the repo. This is to convey this in a language that you understand, which is PowerShell. So we're going to convey those composite actions using PowerShell concepts. Here's my parameter. So I wish, I really wanted to follow, whenever I was pasting in the GitHub Actions YAML, I really wanted to follow the way that they did it. It's all lowercase with some dashes. And in our case, we really like the uppercase, camel case. But here, I was able to do it. So this is the PowerShell modules to cache from the PowerShell gallery, right? So we pass in our inputs. And if we look at the action.yaml, it's required, right? So what is that in the PowerShell concept? It is mandatory. You pass that in. We have a little verbose. Maybe it should probably be output. But actually we don't want output because this is the PowerShell script. So we're going to keep it verbose, and we'll just say gathering information for these modules. And if you remember, we were talking about the needed modules. So if you pass in Pester, then you don't actually need to go and install it. So we have this needed, and here it is running main.ps1 dash type needed dash module, and that's similar to what we're seeing in the action itself, right there. So we're getting our key gen, and we're getting our default module path. It's executing that. This PS script root, which is currently the directory that you're executing it from, is similar to the GitHub action path. And then here is our output. So again, we have the inputs, the runs, and the outputs. And this is our output with a PS custom object. We say needed, keygen, module path, modules to cache. So that's going to return PS framework, PowerShell job, and DBA tools. So we've gone through and looked at this action.yaml, kind of ignored this because we're just copy pasting this not so cute output, and then we have our outputs. Here's again our main. This is the actual PowerShell that you're getting to write within your composite output, and then we put that out onto the marketplace, and we call it from. As an end user, or perhaps you're the end user, you just copy and paste that. Again, you go, see it there? Copy paste this, put it into your own code, do some tabs, and then replace what you need. In this case, it's just PS framework, PowerShell jobs, and DBA tools, and it does everything else for you. So if you change it, you're like, oh, I needed what's another? I needed to add PS logging. Then the next time it'll create that new key, it'll invalidate your cache, and it'll go out and it will get your modules that you need. So that is all that I have. Hopefully this like really helped you understand in a PowerShelly way how you can create GitHub Actions, put it out onto the marketplace, share it with the world, or use it within your own repositories for your own workflows. I've seen this used for people testing their Azure keys and things like that. And so this can also, I believe, access your secrets too. I just don't have any secrets within this.
Very, very interesting stuff. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So there was a fairly active chat going on, and I kind of get the sense that this talk was split among two groups. So I think there's a number of people that attend our group that live in this world and are like, wow, this is great. I'm going to take this and I'm going to go use it immediately. And then I think there's a separate set of world that is probably a little bit more akin to me, that is like a sysadmin is like, man, I love GitHub Actions, but I'm not sure where to start. So one question I was going to ask you, and I have another one queued up as well, is like, you've written a lot of code, you have repos, you're a maintainer on stuff. Like, generally speaking, someone has code and they want to start automating some actions. You gave examples in the slides earlier. What's like a really great place to start, an easy, tangible one that someone who has no actions and just a repo, that's something that they should sort of strive for? Is it tester tests on check-in, that kind of deal? Like, where do you think a good place to start with an action is for someone who's green to this completely?
I mean, for me, I love integration tests. And so the first one that I originally had is to copy paste. And for me, I like to get excited about stuff, and that keeps me hooked on continuing to develop. So if you're somebody who doesn't know actions, but you know Docker, then you can, find a Docker container that you want to interact with. And I do think that for me, as a PowerShell tool maker, I do want to do those tests. I do want to use Pester against as much as I can. And it's really rewarding that that you have this like complete software development process that includes your testing. And I think a lot of us are probably familiar with Pester. So that is, in my opinion, Pester against a container. Testing your own commands is one of the coolest things to keep you hooked and get you started. Because it is, I know, like initially, whenever I was looking at Sanders actions, I was like, whoo, that's a lot. But if you just take, a beginner, not a beginner action, if you take this first starting action and then just go step by step and modify it, you go and you find the the container that you want, you could just replace this. And then, if you have any secrets, if you don't, then just delete it. And kind of pair it up from there.
You kind of talking to where I want to go there is the idea that, you're doing your development in your own practice. When you're doing some of this, do you just continuously do new builds to try and work out that kind of stuff? Somebody mentioned something about, doing it locally and then pushing it up to GitHub, or basically use GitHub as your, your development environment. How do you work at that point, or do you have any suggestions there?
So if I had to guess, somebody was Justin Grote who actually told me about something called ACT, which is, let's see, what is it?
I don't know if you know, but Justin's here.
Oh yeah, totally. So if you do GitHub Actions local runner, then you could see necto/act. And this is a project that will help you run it locally. Not gonna lie, I kind of I like opening up my GitHub desktop. I'm a big GUI fan, and and committing it to GitHub and kind of let them do the work. So I'm intrigued by the ACT project, but for me, I'm just sending it out to GitHub and letting them do everything every time.
So you don't feel bad at all going, oh my God, there's like 85 runs there, but you're like, I'm good to go.
I don't care. No, because there was, whenever I was first learning to create my own action, I literally had 532 different commits, which is why I wanted to create that reshareable one for something that we do all the time, which is installing modules. It took me 532 times to get this right. And yeah, it doesn't bother me. I mean, except for like maybe the environment, but I'm just going to be burning electricity here either way. So
Well, so along the lines of the 532 times to do that, that's very reassuring to hear, because I think a lot of people forget that when we see these presentations that someone practiced this probably a few times to try to make it as concise as possible for people to see,
yes,
right?
yes,
And I will also say that that's one of the interesting things about watching your Twitch streams or any Twitch streams in general, because what you're watching is someone sort of like work through the permutation of a problem live and
right,
really saying, I'm okay if someone sees me like make typos at the command line or
totally.
not know how to do a command, and let me go get Google that or whatever. So I can relate to that. One thing you were doing throughout the process that I kind of wasn't sure why you were worried about it. I think I know why, but if you're running an action and the
Hmm.
action is something that's basically happening behind the scenes on a
Uh-huh.
commit, right? Why were you so focused on shaving off seconds?
Because I stare at those actions running.
Okay, so you're like
It's
me. I do the same goddamn
yeah,
thing.
it's
I
part of
used
the enjoyment process that I'm like, I do exactly that. I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna work? And then I watch it run every single thing. And so in it, I mean, with those 532 or whatever commits that I did, you know, if that's taking 1 minute longer, then that's slowing down my process. And so that's why I do want to get it. And you know, I mean, for me, like um I know that maybe some people want higher numbers on the PowerShell gallery, and I certainly do. But like, I also feel bad because there's an assumption that whenever you see a number like Frederick Weinman, who created PS Framework, he'd be like, Chrissy, 10,000 downloads, right? But if that's part of somebody's CI/CD process, I consider that in my own uh, modules afloat. I want to know like more of like unique users that are coming back and getting it and installing it to their machine. And I know that things like Pester have millions of downloads because they are part of the CI/CD process. But this, in a way, by caching it, not only saves time, but it just kind of keeps the environment cleaner. But yeah, I like things to be fast, and I like to watch the process. Right now, I don't. I don't anymore. I just figure that, well, I'm working on things that can't be tested because it's against tenable.sc, which is not the free product. So it's those commands, I can modify them, and um, they're not going to make this fail. So yeah, I'm not sitting on it anymore. But there are a lot of times with dbatools. Oh my god, it used to be torturous because it would take like 22 minutes to run our 14,000 tests, and I would just, you know, I'd have to go like make some tea and come back and just wait for that. So I do like to make it as efficient as possible.
I am guilty of in my earlier years. You know, you're supposed to be like do a task, be efficient, and go off and do something else. That's the whole point of automation. But I would be like, eh, Windows defrag, and
Rocking.
then I'd sit there and I'd watch
Yeah.
that
Oh
damn
God,
defragger run, and I'm like,
defragging. Because you don't want to mess it up because he's gonna slow it down. And like,
uh,
what are you gonna do? You're gonna go watch TV? No, you're just gonna like click, 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 click.
yeah. I always get
There,
sucked into those things.
it's so true.
So, Chrissy, along the lines of the 532 commits, how can you speak to how you are debugging those errors when the action runs? Where do you go look, and how do you determine what you need to change?
Wonderful question. Let me go and show you one of my failures. So we're going to go to potato quality, 10 tools.
And while you're doing that, I don't know if you know, but there's quite a bit of chatter right now wondering what your commit messages look like if they want to know if it's like please work, please
Oh,
again.
okay. So, so
Expletive,
sometimes,
expletive.
sometimes I do good commit messages. It's like with DBA tools, those commit messages are usually pretty accurate. whenever I'm first spinning up a project, and I still feel that even though I've worked on 10 tools for a while, that I'm still sort of spinning it up. But this is what it's not super helpful. Move credential hash to another. So basically, if I think that something's going to cause a problem, then I'll be like, oh yeah, it was whenever I move that credential hash. So yeah, I kind of go based on, ooh, this was good. But I do use this to report a lot of my work. Like if you have to do a weekly activity report, which I do use my commit messages to go through. So this is a little bit more accurate. Um, Although I also use GitHub Desktop to look at the changes that I make and kind of speak to that. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. But here we go. This is a failure. Let's go ahead and look at that. You could see it here, failure for localhost. The type initializer from Microsoft Win32 registry threw an exception. So then I was like, oh, it doesn't work on Linux. So I don't want to use this dependency. And then I went and I used something else instead. I believe there are some things that I have to skip because there are some, you see where it says skipped 5. There are some things that I just can't get to work on GitHub's repository or the GitHub's platform, and they work locally. Whenever that happens, I'll just test it a couple times and then set it to skip and move on. It hurts, but I figure that that's something that'll work itself out. Somebody else will file a bug and then GitHub will fix it.
Well, I think it's refreshing to hear that you're not superhuman, and then you could solve everything on the first look.
It takes me a long time. Like first I try, I really like the excitement of like, oh, I got it to work. Okay, now I need to make it better. And so yeah, it's very time consuming for me. But all in all, to answer the person's question, the output we had talked about in the slides, that the output is like, it's really rich. And so this is essentially the computer screen that you would be looking at. So if it's showing in PowerShell.exe that there's a Microsoft.Win32.registry exception, then that's what you're going to be seeing locally.
Very cool. Very cool. So we're going to be wrapping up here soon, folks. If you have questions, now is definitely the time to get them in. So there's been a lot of chatter in the chat, and I think we've answered most of the questions internally. But if somebody has something they want to ask Chrissy, now is a really good time before we wrap up. Phil, any comments you want to finish up with here?
No, other than just thinking all the things that now I can do with it. So know that
Awesome.
Ideas. So that's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I do want to throw in one quick thing. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, make it bigger.
If you do a search for PowerShell GitHub Actions test, I'm really excited to report that on GitHub Docs, they open source their docs, and the day that they did, I'm always jealous. I don't know about all of you, but man, like everybody always caters to Node, to Python, to Ruby. Sometimes everybody loves Java, VS Code, like Microsoft Docs drives me crazy. And so I really wanted PowerShell, like it's a legitimate language, just put it out there. So you can Google search that, and this is like, I basically took the Python tutorial and then wrote one for PowerShell. And this has a sample little thing here. I will say this, that this isn't, and anybody else who's used CI/CD, this happens on AppBayer, and then it also happens on GitHub Actions as well. If you do this and there's a failure, I don't think that it actually shows that little X that you're looking for. For me, I wrap everything in something called pester.ps1, and I just copied it from dbatools. There was another contributor that set it up. So if we go and we look at dbatools, and then we go to tests, and then maybe not this one, maybe not this one. You know what? I'm gonna do it on 10 tools. My bad. Okay, hold on. 10 tools.
So it looks like Justin is saying that you have to throw an error. You have to throw.
Right. And so, like, it's not as straightforward. I know that my examples showed that, but like, I didn't want to get into it because somebody would be like, oh, Chrissy, you're just executing like pester.ps1. I want to see some invoke pester in the mix. This is essentially, I just copy paste from dbatools or here 10 tools. And here's where I do the throw. And if you have the throw, now I thought about stop action, but that means that pester is going to cancel out early, and then you're not going to get to see all of the tests that failed. You'll just see the first test that failed. So yeah, Justin has something there. Let's see.
So
It is much nicer.
a little farther up in the chat, Brett had asked, is there one thing you wish that was in Actions that's not today? Something that's missing?
Yeah, absolutely. If I could get those composite actions, you could even see me lamenting on the PowerShell marketplace right here to do. Once GitHub supports actions in composite actions, this is the only thing that will be required. So, and that's something that it's hard to Google though. Let's see, actions in actions GitHub. There it was. There was that issue. Hold on, let me. Actions in actions. There we go. So I do follow this and I check it every now and then, but it was created in August of last year. And then this dude is like, hey, I was an intern and I left. So I don't know if this is going to be addressed anytime soon. A lot of people want it, but this is what I would like so that I can take advantage of multiple, like what if somebody wanted to build on top of what it is that I'm doing? Right now they have to copy and paste my entire code and then do it themselves. But with this, if we could support multiple actions within a composite action, then that would make the code that you have to show people a lot more straightforward. Because I won't lie, like looking at this, well, not that one, it's mine. I want it to be like, hey, just copy paste these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code. Instead, I'm like, take this ugly thing and paste it into your stuff. This is too much.
All right. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is wrap it up here. I'm going to send out a little message to the people who are in this session now, currently here. Don't leave yet. We have a little bit of bonus content for you when this recording ends. So stay with us. We're going to wrap this up. So first of all, I think this was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate the time and the quality of the content and just throwing a bone out there. I mean, man, super smooth presentation. Really great. I love that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good deal.
So, Phil, you want to, what do you say we wrap this one up? Oh, you're muted, buddy.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll certainly see you again in a week and a half. So don't forget to follow us. We're on Twitter. The YouTube video will get posted in fairly soon, and live stream. There'll be a live stream, Sony. So anyway, the idea that we will post this on YouTube in a little bit, and so you can get it, and don't forget to follow us on YouTube. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, you got a
That's
free
what you're
throw
trying to
from
say, like
Chrissy
and subscribe.
with the fingers. Yeah.